The golden rays of dawn pierce through the marble columns of the great library of Alexandria, illuminating scrolls that contain the accumulated wisdom of the ancient world. Here, in the year 51 BCE, a 21-year-old woman sits surrounded by texts written in Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Arabic, and Latin. This is not merely a scholarly pursuit. This is preparation for survival. Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra runs her fingers along a papyrus documenting trade agreements with distant kingdoms. What Rome's historians would later dismiss as mere beauty and seduction was, in reality, something far more threatening to their empire. Intellect weaponized through linguistic mastery and cultural understanding. The morning air carries the scent of frankincense from the harbor, where ships from across the Mediterranean wait to unload their precious cargo. Each vessel represents a diplomatic relationship that Cleopatra has cultivated, not through translators, but through direct communication in the native tongue of her trading partners. When Ethiopian merchants arrive, she greets them in their ancient language. When Jewish scholars seek audience, she discusses theology in fluent Hebrew. This linguistic arsenal transforms every conversation from a mere transaction into a strategic alliance. In the throne room of the palace, advisors present the daily reports. Egypt's grain exports feed 1/3 of Rome's population, yet Roman officials consistently attempt to renegotiate terms that would reduce Egypt's profits. Cleopatra listens to their demands translated through intermediaries, then responds directly in perfect Latin, a calculated revelation that strips away Rome's assumption of Egyptian dependence on their linguistic superiority. The palace walls, adorned with hieroglyphics that tell the stories of her Ptolemaic ancestors, serve as a constant reminder of the delicate balance she must maintain. For 3 centuries, her Greek-Macedonian dynasty has ruled Egypt while remaining culturally distinct from their subjects. But Cleopatra recognizes what her predecessors failed to understand. True power in Egypt requires more than royal blood. It demands the authentic voice of a pharaoh who can speak to her people in their own language. As afternoon shadows lengthen across the palace courtyard, she makes a decision that will define her reign. Unlike every Ptolemaic ruler before her, she will learn Egyptian, not just the formal hieroglyphic script used in temples, but the demotic writing of merchants and farmers. This choice represents more than linguistic curiosity. It signals a fundamental shift in the relationship between ruler and ruled. The palace scribes record her daily activities, but they cannot capture the true significance of what unfolds in these private moments of study. Each new language mastered becomes a key to unlock different chambers of the Mediterranean world. Each conversation conducted without interpreters represents a crack in Rome's assumption of cultural superiority. Standing on the lighthouse-lit harbor as evening approaches, Cleopatra watches Roman ships arrive with their usual cargo of demands and expectations. But she possesses something these visitors cannot comprehend: the ability to understand not just their words, but the cultural assumptions embedded within their language. This knowledge transforms every diplomatic encounter from a submission into a negotiation between equals. Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter, where we'll uncover how Cleopatra built an economic empire that made Rome dependent on Egypt. Like this video, if you're beginning to see why Roman historians might have had reasons to minimize her true capabilities, and comment below, what other historical figures do you think were deliberately misrepresented by their enemies? The pre-dawn darkness of Alexandria's commercial district pulses with activity that defies the stereotypes Roman propaganda would later create. Here, in the shadow of the lighthouse that guides ships from across the known world, Cleopatra VII has constructed something far more dangerous to Roman interests than any army: an economic empire built on innovation, strategic partnerships, and technological advancement. In the royal workshops near the harbour, craftsmen apply techniques that transform raw materials into luxury goods coveted throughout the Mediterranean. The air, thick with the scent of cedar and myrrh, masks the true revolution occurring within these walls. Cleopatra has recognized what Roman merchants prefer to ignore. Egypt possesses not just resources, but the intellectual capacity to add value to everything it produces. The morning sun reveals papyrus factories where workers have perfected manufacturing processes that produce writing material superior to anything available in Rome. But this is more than mere production. It represents information control. Every scroll, every document, every treaty signed across the Mediterranean depends on Egyptian papyrus. Cleopatra understands that whoever controls the medium controls the message. In the palace archives, detailed records reveal the scope of her economic strategy. Egyptian grain feeds Rome, but Egyptian ships also carry silk from China, spices from India, and amber from the Baltic. These are not simple trade routes. They represent a carefully orchestrated network that positions Egypt as the indispensable hub of Mediterranean commerce. Roman merchants may believe they dictate terms, but the reality flows in the opposite direction. The afternoon heat shimmers off the harbour waters, where her naval innovations become visible. Egyptian shipbuilders have developed vessels that combine Greek engineering with local knowledge of Nile navigation and Red Sea winds. These ships carry more cargo, travel faster, and require smaller crews than their Roman counterparts. Each technological advantage translates into economic leverage that compounds over time. Within the palace walls, Cleopatra meets with her financial advisors. Men and women chosen for expertise rather than aristocratic bloodlines. The scrolls spread across marble tables detail currency manipulation strategies that would make modern economists pause in admiration. By maintaining Egypt's monetary independence while accepting Roman coins, she creates a dual system that allows Egypt to benefit from Roman expansion while maintaining economic sovereignty. The palace workshops buzz with activity that extends far beyond traditional crafts. Here, Egyptian chemists have perfected the production of glass that surpasses anything manufactured in Rome or Greece. The techniques remain closely guarded secrets, ensuring that Egyptian glass continues to command premium prices in markets from Britain to Mesopotamia. This technological monopoly generates revenue streams that fund both domestic development and military preparedness. As evening approaches, the harbour reveals the true scope of Cleopatra's achievement. Ships bearing Egyptian goods depart for destinations that span the known world, but they carry more than merchandise. They transport Egyptian influence, Egyptian relationships, and Egyptian alternatives to Roman hegemony. Each successful voyage strengthens networks that reduce global dependence on Roman mediation. The palace receives reports from trade missions that extend beyond the Mediterranean. Egyptian expeditions have established direct relationships with kingdoms in Nubia, Ethiopia, and the Horn of Africa. These connections bypass Roman territorial control and create alternative pathways for goods and information. What appears to Rome as African tribute actually represents sophisticated international partnerships that enhance Egypt's strategic autonomy. Standing in her private chambers overlooking the harbour, Cleopatra reviews documents that quantify her success. Egypt's wealth has grown not through conquest or tribute, but through value creation and strategic positioning. The kingdom that Roman senators dismiss as a client state has become an economic power whose cooperation Rome requires but cannot compel. Hit that subscribe button to discover how Cleopatra's diplomatic mastery created alliances that threatened Rome's entire imperial strategy. Like this video, if you're realizing that calling her a mere seductress was Rome's way of diminishing an economic threat they couldn't match. Comment and tell us, which modern leaders remind you of Cleopatra's strategic thinking? The marble floors of Cleopatra's private council chamber reflect the flickering light of oil lamps as scrolls bearing seals from kingdoms across 3 continents cover every available surface. Here, in the heart of Alexandria during the year 44 BCE, the last pharaoh of Egypt orchestrates a diplomatic network so sophisticated that Roman senators will spend decades attempting to dismantle what she built in mere years. The morning brings messengers from territories that span from the Atlantic coast of Morocco to the mountain kingdoms of Armenia. Each arrival represents more than correspondence. They carry the threads of alliances that weave together a coalition capable of challenging Roman hegemony. Cleopatra reads reports written in languages her Roman contemporaries cannot even identify, much less comprehend. In the palace's map room, detailed charts reveal the scope of her diplomatic achievement. Red markers indicate kingdoms that have pledged military support. Blue markers show trade partners whose economic interests align with Egyptian prosperity. Gold markers designate cultural allies who view Egypt as a beacon of learning and artistic achievement. The pattern that emerges illustrates a web of relationships that surrounds and penetrates Roman territory. The strategic genius becomes apparent in how these alliances complement rather than compete with each other. African kingdoms provide gold and exotic goods that Egyptian merchants transport to European markets. Celtic chieftains in Gaul offer metals and amber in exchange for Egyptian textiles and medical knowledge. Persian nobles seek Egyptian astronomical calculations while providing access to Asian trade routes. Each relationship strengthens the others, creating a network effect that multiplies Egypt's influence. Afternoon diplomatic sessions reveal Cleopatra's mastery of cultural psychology. When meeting with Germanic tribal leaders, she emphasizes Egypt's ancient resistance to foreign domination. With Gallic nobles, she discusses shared opposition to Roman cultural imperialism. Persian diplomats hear about Egypt's respect for diverse religious traditions. Each conversation speaks to specific historical grievances while positioning Egypt as the alternative to Roman hegemony. The palace archives contain correspondence that demonstrates the sophistication of her intelligence network. Egyptian agents in Rome report on Senate debates, military preparations, and economic challenges. Similar operations in Carthage, Athens, and Damascus provide real-time information about regional developments that affect Egyptian interests. This intelligence advantage allows Cleopatra to anticipate Roman moves and position her responses accordingly. Her diplomatic protocols reflect an understanding of power dynamics that Roman politicians consistently underestimate. Rather than demanding immediate commitments, she offers long-term partnerships that allow other rulers to maintain dignity while aligning with Egyptian interests. Instead of military threats, she presents economic opportunities that make cooperation more profitable than resistance. These methods build loyalty that survives temporary setbacks and political changes. The evening brings reports from her most audacious diplomatic initiative: direct negotiations with Parthian leadership. These discussions explore coordinated resistance to Roman expansion in Asia while maintaining Egyptian neutrality in existing conflicts. The conversations occur through intermediaries who ensure plausible deniability, but the implications terrify Roman intelligence services who recognize the potential for Eastern and Southern alliances that could strangle Roman trade routes. Palace records document the cultural dimension of her diplomatic strategy. Egyptian scholars teach mathematics and engineering in foreign courts. Egyptian physicians provide medical treatment that saves the lives of foreign nobles. Egyptian artists create works that celebrate the histories and traditions of allied kingdoms. These exchanges build emotional connections that transcend political calculations and create lasting foundations for cooperation. The most sophisticated element of her diplomatic network involves coordination with other female rulers who face similar challenges from Roman expansion. Queen Dido's successors in Carthage, Celtic queens in Britain, and regional leaders throughout Asia Minor share information and resources through channels that Roman intelligence cannot penetrate. This sisterhood of resistance operates beneath the surface of official diplomacy while achieving strategic objectives that formal treaties could never accomplish. As midnight approaches, Cleopatra reviews the day's diplomatic correspondence while considering moves that will unfold over years rather than months. Her network has evolved beyond simple alliances into something unprecedented in ancient politics, a voluntary confederation of diverse kingdoms united by shared interests rather than imposed authority. This represents the emergence of an alternative model to Roman imperialism, one based on mutual benefit rather than conquest. Standing on her palace balcony overlooking the harbor, where ships from allied kingdoms rock gently in the Mediterranean breeze, she understands that Rome's greatest fear is not Egyptian military might or economic competition. Their terror stems from the possibility that other peoples might discover they don't need Roman protection, Roman law, or Roman culture to prosper. Her diplomatic achievement proves that alternatives exist, and that proof threatens the ideological foundations of Roman imperial authority. The scrolls scattered across her chamber contain more than diplomatic correspondence. They document the blueprint for a world where multiple centers of power could coexist without the dominance of any single empire. Rome's subsequent efforts to destroy not just Cleopatra, but the very memory of her achievements reveal how deeply this vision threatened their conception of inevitable imperial destiny. Subscribe now, because this series has only scratched the surface of what Rome worked so hard to hide about Cleopatra's true legacy. Like this video if you're starting to understand why Roman historians had every reason to reduce this brilliant strategist to a mere footnote about beauty and seduction. Comment below and share. What other historical narratives do you think were deliberately distorted by the victors who wrote the history books? This series reveals how Cleopatra's true threat to Rome lay not in her personal relationships with Roman leaders, but in her demonstration that Egyptian civilization could thrive independently while building alliances that offered viable alternatives to Roman hegemony. Her linguistic abilities, economic innovations, and diplomatic networks represented a comprehensive challenge to Roman imperial ideology that required systematic historical distortion to neutralize.